my son was missing for a
Mm-hmm.
month,
Wow.
and I thought he had died. He was on a
Mm-hmm.
run, and I could not eat. I could not
Mm-hmm.
sleep. I could not. It was one of the only times I could not like function at work.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't go to work because, as a parent, it's a much different experience, watching somebody that you love slowly kill themselves and not
Mm-hmm.
be able to save them, not to be
Mm-hmm.
able to do anything to stop it.
Yeah.
And that's where I was at. I felt very, that was like the true, for me, I didn't feel so powerless over my addiction, but I felt
Mm-hmm.
totally powerless over this whole situation with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was convinced that he had died. I spent like 3 days crying nonstop, and to the point that I hit an emotional bottom in
Mm-hmm.
recovery at 14 months, um, in my bedroom, curled up in a ball on my bedroom floor,
Mm-hmm.
begging and pleading with God to please find him,
Mm-hmm.
because I had no idea where he was, and I thought he was dead.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Your Best Self podcast, where I get to interview successful and or inspiring people just like KJ Foster, who's going to share her story with us of, being a mother with a son who got addicted to drugs and also battling, her own addiction, and how she was able to recover from that and then basically become her best self and then thrive throughout that addiction. So KJ Foster is a resilience expert. She's an author, she's a speaker, she's an entrepreneur, and most importantly, she's also a mother. She has an incredible story to share, about her addiction recovery from, 11 years ago, or I think it's even longer by now, that changed absolutely everything. And I would love to hear the story of KJ Foster. So KJ Foster, welcome to the interview. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. So KJ, please share your story again, how you just basically shared with me. Where did it all start, and what did you go through?
Sure. Well, where it all started was, back about, I don't even know how long ago, 20 years ago at this point now. I went through a very, very difficult divorce. It was very contentious. I would classify it as a trauma. It was just a difficult experience. I think that anybody that has been through divorce can probably attest to the fact that no matter how how positive it is, how much you get along, and it's a very difficult process to go through, let alone when it's a traumatic experience. And so, I turned to drinking alcohol more and more as a coping mechanism through this experience. I mean, I was at the time like 38, 39 years old, had been married for almost 20 years at the time. And I, come from a family where, drinking is very common, and, people drink a lot, but they're also very, very successful. And as I shared with you earlier, the motto sort of in my family is, work hard, play hard. And so I grew up in this environment with a lot of drinking, but also a lot of success, definitely instilled in me a very strong work ethic, very strong values. But this drinking thing was a big part of the culture of my family. And so what happened through this experience of the divorce is that my drinking took on kind of this whole new meaning, and that I was using it to cope with the feelings and the fear and all these things that were happening. And one of my sons, who was a young teenager at the time, was also turning to alcohol and drugs as this coping mechanism. And what happened is that our path, our progression of our substance abuse into addiction kind of paralleled each other and fed off of each other. So as he would have more difficulty, get into trouble, with his drug use, I drank more as a result of that. And so it finally culminated in me getting sober in 2008. And after struggling to try and get sober for a number of years, it wasn't until 2008 when I had gotten a DUI that it really that was the event that solidified to me in my mind that this is really an issue, KJ. You have to get a hold of this. You need to do something. And that's when my recovery journey began. And my son, though, however, his addiction progressed and got even worse during the first year of my recovery, which is common, by the way, in families where there's dual addiction going on. As one person gets better, often the other person will get worse. And thank God, you know, he got sober 14 months into my recovery. And when he got sober, a couple of months after that, I met my husband. So my husband, I'm approaching 12 years of sobriety, and my husband is approaching 17 years of sobriety. And when I met my husband, he was he had just gotten his master's degree in mental health counseling, rehab counseling, actually, and was going on to get his PhD. And he was the one who encouraged me and said, you know, because I had such a passion at this point for helping other people who were struggling with addiction. He said, why don't you go back to school, update your master's degree, and pursue this? So I changed careers completely. I was in the hospitality industry for a number of years, and I really just decided as the result of my own recovery that I wanted to help other people recover, because not only did I want to help other people recover, I wanted to help them to be able to see that they could not only recover from this addiction experience, but they could become better than they ever were before. Because like I said, you know, I come from a family that's very successful, and yet, you know, I was, you know, for the most part, very successful. Even, you know, throughout my addiction, I always was able to go to work, you know, and that's another, you know, myth kind of about people who, you know, suffer from addiction and struggle with addiction, is that, you know, they live under the bridge and they're, you know, so down and out. And there are people walking around showing up for work every single day that are, you know, in the depths of hell, so to speak, struggling with their addiction. And so I always was able to get up for work, show up for work, but clearly not at my best, because what I discovered through my recovery is that even though I was seemingly high functioning, you know, that's what they call it. Oh, you are high functioning, you know, alcoholic. And the fact of the matter is that I guess I was high functioning, but I didn't realize until after I was, you know, into my recovery for a couple of years that I could be so much better than I ever was before my addiction. So because I was living in this environment of work hard, play hard, you know, I didn't realize that the playing hard was really taking away from my ability to be my best self. And that my recovery has created this, you know, has empowered my true self and made it possible for me to be better than I ever was before. So I wanted to share that with other people. I wanted to share with people that, you know, there's not only this possibility for you to recover, but you can actually become a better version of yourself. You can become better than you ever were before the addiction. And one thing that I wanted to point out too is that, you know, addiction is an experience. Okay. It's an illness. And so many people look at individuals who struggle with addiction as they're just an addict. They're just an alcoholic. They're this, they're that. And that really damages a person's ability to recover in some cases, because it is not who the person is. You know, it is an experience that they're having. It's an illness that they're experiencing. And it's an illness that you can not only recover from, but you can absolutely become better than you ever were before.
Yeah. Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that story, and congratulations, obviously, on turning almost 12 years into recovery, and your husband's 17 years. That's absolutely amazing. So, what I would like to know is, when is something considered an addiction rather than just a bad habit?
Well, it's all about the consequences,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there are plenty of people out there who are, drinking and using drugs to
Mm-hmm.
excess,
Mm-hmm.
probably, but not seemingly experiencing any consequences. And that's
Yeah.
sort of the trickiness when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to addiction, is that, I guess the difference between substance abuse and
Mm-hmm.
addiction is that when you cross over, I call it like crossing over
Mm-hmm.
into addiction, because um, the difference to me is that you start to drink or drug against your own will, even,
Mm-hmm.
in your mind, that you need to stop, or that this isn't really
Mm-hmm.
healthy for you, and it's becoming an issue in your life, but you keep doing it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Another classic sort of symptom that you've crossed over into addiction is that you start to experience consequences, yet you don't change your behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're faced with a crisis, you're faced
Mm-hmm.
with getting fired from a job, you're
Mm-hmm.
faced with a health issue, and yet you still don't change behavior. So that's the key difference between somebody who may be like just a heavy drinker or a problematic drinker, or somebody who's using drugs recreationally, to somebody where you're faced with this life issue, and
Yeah.
and it's a consequence, or it's a problem, and yet you continue to drink or drug
Mm-hmm.
despite those consequences.
Mm. And when was the time for you where I obviously shared that in the story, where you sort of had this, crossing over point where you realize, all right, it is an addiction. It is not just something that I do here and there, but it actually is an addiction and I need help. When did you realize that?
Well, it's hard to like really pinpoint when I
Mm-hmm.
realized that, because addiction versus substance abuse, because part of the mental illness is that it's an illness that tells you you don't have it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
especially if you've been somebody, I think sometimes it's easier when you're like, I mean, maybe not when you're a young person. So
Mm-hmm.
like I compare like my son to myself. So my son, I think genetically, there was a combination, genetically predisposed, because his father is
Mm-hmm.
an addict, and so being genetically predisposed and then also experiencing trauma
Mm-hmm.
escalated that. But he was always somebody who, from the moment he put a drink or a drug in his body, he was not high functioning. There was no going to school, there was no holding down a job, there was no, it was like pedal to the metal from day
Mm-hmm.
one.
Yeah.
So whereas for me, I was able to drink, socially for a number of years. Did I have periods in my life where maybe I was drinking, abusing more
Mm-hmm.
than social? Yes. But
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I was always able to work and function, have a
Mm-hmm.
family, all of that. So when it started to become an issue is very soon, interestingly enough, my divorce was the result of my ex-husband's alcohol use. So that
Mm-hmm.
was a contributing factor to the divorce. And at that time, I didn't have a problem with
Mm-hmm.
alcohol. It was his problem,
Mm-hmm.
not my problem. And it
Yeah.
wasn't until the divorce occurred and I found myself starting to use alcohol more and more, that I, on my own, decided
Mm-hmm.
this isn't heading in a good direction. I'm
Mm-hmm.
drinking more. I need to do something about this. And I chose to enter Alcoholics Anonymous at the time,
Mm-hmm.
without having suffered any consequences other than looking at myself in the mirror and going, oh my God, this,
Mm-hmm.
you're out of control, this is
Mm-hmm.
bad. And because I hadn't suffered any other consequences externally, they were all internal, to me, it was very easy to compare myself out, because I heard other people's stories and they were all so like, to me,
Mm-hmm.
horrific, and
Yeah.
people getting arrested, and people, doing like really crazy things as a result of their addiction. So I thought to myself, I'm different, I'm not as bad as this person, that person. So I struggled, kind of going in and out of the program for 5 years because I hadn't experienced any true external consequences until my DUI.
Okay.
And when I got my DUI was when, because I would say to my family, my drinking family, remember, my family, that
Work
this
hard,
is
play hard.
a big part of the culture. I would say to them, I'm going to AA. Like, I really think I have a problem with my drinking. And they, unlike a lot of families, would say to me, no, you're fine.
Yeah.
Like, you're working, you're a single mom, you're taking care of your kids. You're like, you're fine. Everybody gets out of hand every once in a while, you're okay. So I'm going, oh, okay, I'm okay, I'm fine.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I got my DUI that I was finally able to say to my family, I think I may actually have a problem here.
Yeah.
And so I entered back into the recovery program, and as I said, my son was getting worse. And at the time, I thought to myself, I'm on probation for 9 months. I'm gonna get my act together. I'm gonna clean up, and then 9 months when I'm off probation, I'm done. I'm good. I'll go on with my life and go back to drinking maybe, but I was committed to, I'm on probation for 9 months. I'm going to abide by the rules, and I'm not going to drink. And even though I found it really, really hard, and this is when I knew this is the crossover point. Okay. So this is a roundabout way. Sorry.
No worries.
Getting there. So, but in talking about it, I'm starting to realize that this was the turning point. So I don't know if you're familiar with because where are you located, Robert?
In Germany.
You're in Germany. So in the States, okay, when you get a DUI, it was my first DUI, but because my blood alcohol level was so high, I was mandated to have a blower in my car. Do you have those in Germany?
Yes, we do also have those in Germany.
Okay, so I had the blower in my car. And so I thought to myself, okay, well, I just won't drink and drive. This is how the mental illness is still like, you're not that bad. And so I went to my boyfriend's house, a man that I was dating at the time, and had a couple of glasses of wine the night before. But I was being good. I had 2 glasses of wine, right? So to me, that's nothing.
That's fine. Yeah.
And I get up in the morning to go start my car. And because it detects any alcohol, or even overnight, like it stays in your body for a long time, it shut down my car.
Oh, wow.
And I couldn't drive my car for 10 hours. It literally locks your car down. So if it detects the alcohol, it's the greatest thing ever. I hated it at the time.
Yeah,
I hate this thing. It's horrible, but I believe it saved my life.
Yeah.
So it was at that moment where I'm standing outside of my car and it's in lockdown and I can't drive it, that I thought to myself, you have a problem, because you're being told you have a problem. You've got a blower device in your car so that you don't start your car when you if you are under the influence of alcohol, and look at what happens. So that was a turning point for me in terms of recognizing that I really needed to do something more drastic than just sort of playing around with the program. I really needed to commit myself to doing the steps and getting the sponsor and doing all that. And so that's when I did it. But I still said to myself, I'm only going to do this for 9 months until I'm off probation. And then what happened is my son got worse. And that was a turning point for me, because when he got sober, it was after a very the only way that I can describe it is this was like my spiritual awakening. They talk about, I don't know if you're familiar with 12-step recovery, but there's this concept of the spiritual awakening. And my son was missing for a month. Wow. And I thought he had died. He was on a run, and I could not eat. I could not sleep. It was one of the only times I could not function at work. I couldn't go to work because, as a parent, it's a much different experience. Watching somebody that you love slowly kill themselves and not be able to save them, not to be able to do anything to stop it.
Yeah.
And that's where I was at. I felt very, that was like the true, for me, I didn't feel so powerless over my addiction, but I felt totally powerless over this whole situation with him. And so I was convinced that he had died. I spent like 3 days crying nonstop, and to the point that I hit an emotional bottom in recovery at 14 months, in my bedroom, you know, curled up in a ball on my bedroom floor, begging and pleading with God to please find him, because I had no idea where he was, and I thought he was dead. And in this conversation with God, I said to God, you know, God, whatever happens, if he dies, if he's dead, and, you know, another, like, even though I don't get, you know, why things happen in the world, why bad things happen, that if another person lives because he died, you know, and learns from this, then I get it somehow. But I'm not going to drink either way. Like, if he lives or dies, I promise you, I'm not going to drink either way. And I went to bed that night after having that conversation with God in tears, and slept for the first time in 3 days, better than I had slept my whole 14 months of sobriety. And I woke up to my sponsor at the time calling me, my very first call of the morning, literally woke up to my phone ringing, and she had found him.
Wow.
At a local, sleeping outside of a local bookstore. And to me, there was no doubt in my mind that God, what I believe to be God, you know, exists and heard my prayer. And so when I went to go meet with him, because I said to her, keep him there, don't let him go anywhere. He was high at the time, and I begged him to let me take him to detox, and he wouldn't come because somebody owed him $5. He wanted to go get his $5. Basically, he wanted to go get high again. And in that moment, watching him walk away, he said to me, I'll call you tomorrow, Mom. And I knew he wasn't going to call me, you know, tomorrow. I was at such peace in watching him walk away that day, because I knew that, you know, he was in God's hands. Like, I had no control over the situation whatsoever. And yet I could go about my day. I have, you know, another child, and I could take care of him and go to work. And I was totally at peace, at a peace I had not ever felt before. And he called me a week later and asked me to pick him up. And that was the beginning of his journey to recovery. And when he called me and I picked him up and I went to a meeting that night, there was a woman at the meeting who said to me, KJ, don't you think that for you to pick up a drink after what happened, after, you know, finding your son and his, you know, him recovering on all of this, don't you think that picking up a drink at this point would be kind of like slapping God in the face? I was like, oh man, like any thought I had of having a drink just totally got like wiped out. Like, that's the way that I really have felt about it, that I'm so grateful for my recovery. I'm so grateful for his recovery, that to me, picking up a drink today is like, would be completely like insane. So that was really a turning point for me in terms of being committed to this, you know, just really not just being sober, but really living like the best life I can possibly live, like really contributing to life rather than taking, you know. It was like when the shift happened for me of, you know, life being all about like, you know, what I can get and what I can achieve. And even though I feel like I've definitely achieved way more than I ever imagined that I would ever achieve, it's based upon this whole mindset of giving, you know, of giving back to people, of helping people, of restoring their hope and their faith, and and helping them to become better than they ever imagined they could be.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really felt that, because obviously I am not a parent. I cannot, imagine how it is being in that situation. I just know how it was for my mom, as I was in the US, abroad for a whole year, and got into a horrible car accident. And, then my host mom called my mother and told her that I was in the hospital basically and under surgery, how she must have felt at that moment, where she was completely helpless. She couldn't, get over there, and it was completely out of her control. So I cannot imagine how hard it must be for a parent seeing his child, seeing his son in that state, and not knowing obviously where he was, and thinking that he died. That's unimaginable for me. So I condemn you for, being able to stay strong at that time, because I believe that, especially in that time, you also said that kind of like turning to drinking was a way of coping with the trauma, coping with the difficulties that you have in life, and escaping sort of this reality, right? So probably like one of those moments where you knew like he was gone and you don't know where he is, probably a lot of people would have picked up drinking again, but you didn't. Right. So what gave you the strength in that time of, not picking up a drink again?
Well, one of the things that I teach to the people that I work with is that there are 3 critical elements that you need in order to successfully recover. And one of them is a mentor, is somebody where you can follow in their footsteps, somebody that has achieved what you are seeking to achieve. And, I teach actually, 6 elements, which I cover in my book, The Warrior's Guide to Successful Sobriety. But out of those 6, there are really 3 that like I believe are absolute musts. Like you really need to have these in order to, like, you could stay abstinent, but what I'm talking about is to successfully recover and become like the best version of yourself. And so the mentor is one of them, but also there's what I call the tribe, which is the support group. And so especially for me during this time, the support group was critical. And I remember, and I'm somebody, even though 12-step recovery it is something that worked for me, it was really the only option. There at the time that I got sober, I didn't know of any other like programs. There's so many more now, which I think is great, because it's hard for a lot of people to get 12-step recovery, especially if you've had like a bit of a higher bottom. I think for people that have really low bottoms, it's definitely, super effective. So having this tribe, this support group that was behind me, because at 9 months sober, I started going to Al-Anon, which is the family members. It's a 12-step program for family members.
Okay.
And I was so resistant. Like people were telling me from the very beginning, KJ, you need to go to Al-Anon. KJ, you need to go to Al-Anon. And I was like, whoa, like all I can handle is like this AA thing right now, but I would go to meetings like every single day and cry about my son. And they would be like, you're in the wrong fellowship here. You need to go to them. I'm like, no, I'm not. So it wasn't until I was in enough pain and desperate enough, which is really like, what it takes for most people to enter any kind of program, that I decided, okay, I'm going to try this Al-Anon thing. And what happened, the very first meeting I went to was really amazing, because the person who was sharing was a son talking about his mother and the effect of her, drinking on his life, which was just sort of very eye-opening to me in and of itself. But after I had the opportunity to share what I was going through, and this was a time where my son was getting into so much trouble, he was like, getting into my house when I wasn't there, when he wasn't supposed to be, things like that, over and over again. And so this gentleman came up to me after the meeting, and he said to me, he did something which I call he patted me on the back and sort of slapped me in the face all at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So he was saying to me, KJ, you really need to set some like boundaries for your son, because what I didn't realize is I was doing things that were actually enabling him, that I, wasn't aware of, like allowing him to continue to, not forcing him to go to treatment, things like that. So he said to me, listen, you need to set some boundaries with him, for him to get better. I have a son. He went through the same thing. He's now recovered. He's, married, has kids. So he gave me hope, like his son went through the same thing. And then he said, these are the things you have to do. You can't let him live with you if he's using drugs. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, what are you suggesting? Like, I can't kick him out. Like, I love him. And he said to me, KJ, you're going to love him to death if you don't start to set some boundaries. So that was like the slapping me in the face. And then he says, but you just said you just celebrated 9 months, right, of sobriety. And I said, yeah. And he said, do you realize how freaking amazing that is? Like all that you're going through with your son, and that you have not picked up a drink or a drug in 9 months. He goes, that is amazing. And I hadn't even thought about it for, I was so focused for 9 months on just getting through the day, that was my life for the first like year and a half of recovery. I feel like a year, like 14 months, just get through the day, KJ, just get through the day. And he was like, that's amazing. And I was like, I stopped for a moment and I was like, that's pretty amazing. But it was my support group. Like when I did have to kick him out of the house and say, listen, you can't live here, which resulted in him then missing for a month. So of course, that was the hardest thing that I ever did, because there are people who have done that and their loved ones have died, and I'm like thinking to myself, I just killed my son. I did it. Like this is, and there were a group of people supporting me that were telling me, listen, you did the right thing. He wouldn't go to treatment. You had to do this. I filed a Marchman Act, which I don't know if they have those in Germany, where you can mandate your loved one into treatment, things like that.
No, don't know. I don't know about that.
Yeah, so that's something that I ultimately, had to do, which helped him to get sober, which is a whole another part of the story. But I filed a Marchman Act. So I had to do all of these things that as a parent, so scary. So like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Am I doing the right thing? Because even though I am a religious person, my concept of spirituality is all about mindset. It's all about going from this place of hopelessness, shame, despair, resentment, anger, all of these negative, like, emotions that are sucking the power out of you and creating this place of powerlessness, to courage, and compassion and understanding and love and forgiveness and all of those like higher vibration emotions. So when I talk spirituality, I'm talking about mindset.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And you just said, where you go, a lot of it is about mindset, obviously. And that's what I want to touch upon a little bit more. And a lot of it is about obviously beliefs and, limiting beliefs sort of that you have in your mind all the time. And you've been talking a little bit more spirituality, and that's what I want to touch upon. So you said you sort of changed the beliefs and the mindset from, all this negative, all this draining energy to the positives. And like, how did you go about doing that? Obviously, you had a support group which helped you. You had mentors who helped you. But did you read any other additional books, or did you, got into courses that helped you change those beliefs?
Sure. I mean, as a part of the 12-step program, you do the steps, which are a process. I believe it's a shame reducing process, a big part of it, but as a part of going through those steps, it is teaching you to go from this place of hopelessness, especially resentment and anger, and I think self-pity is a big one that people struggle with, because addiction in and of itself is, addiction is a mental illness. And as a mental illness, there's not one single person that you're going to find who's in active addiction, that is not in a place of hopelessness, despair, negativity, you know, anger, resentment, blame, all of those things. So for me, the 12 steps were a process of helping me start to go from this place of negativity to this place of courage, this place of hope, this place of unconditional love. Like that's one of the, you know, it's one of the sort of mottos, so to speak. I can't think of the word, but it's, you know, 12-step recovery is all about practicing, you know, unconditional love. So that was part of it. And there are other programs that, you know, that help you get there as well. But for me, it was the 12 steps. And I think it was through my education, like going back and getting my PhD and learning so much more about addiction as a brain disease and how it works. I read a book that absolutely blew my mind because it, for me, solidified everything that I already believed about addiction and recovery. And all of a sudden I read this book and it was like yes, you're right, KJ. This is what, and it's called Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. It's amazing because it's all about this concept of spirituality in terms of, you know, negative thoughts, you know, and positive thoughts, and learning how, you know, our thinking, everything's connected, you know. So like there's this motto, or there's another word for it that I'm not thinking of at the moment, like phrase in addiction recovery, particularly 12-step recovery, where they say, act yourself into right thinking, because service is a big part of the recovery process, you know, volunteering and helping other people. That's the core of the 12-step program is one alcoholic helping another alcoholic, one addict helping another addict. And so it's doing service. And so when you think of that concept of acting your way into right thinking, it's all about how connected everything is. So what I think, right, impacts how I feel, and how I feel impacts what I do, right? So just as much as what I do will impact how I feel and then what I think. So by doing service and helping others, you're creating self-esteem. You're creating good feelings about yourself, which then impacts how you think about yourself. But another book that I read that was pivotal in my recovery was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And so learning, you know, starting to practice meditation and, you know, prayer and meditation. I was not a big meditator in the beginning. And I didn't really view mindfulness as meditation. I always kind of thought of meditation as this like long, you know, you got to get the candles, you have to get the music, you have to do it for like a super long period of time. And when I read The Power of Now and learned about mindfulness, I suffered from a lot of anxiety, which is very common in early recovery. And I want to say I was like 6 months sober when I read this book. I can't really remember when it was, but I remember reading it and thinking to myself, because he talks about how, you know, it's all about what's going on up here, that it's impacting your reality, you know? And so he suggests in this book that you go through this like 24-hour period where you monitor like what you're really, because, you know, you become that third party observer of self, because most people go about their day and they don't even think, like it's autopilot, right? It's just people are autopilot. They're not thinking about how what they're thinking is influencing what's going on around them. So he made this suggestion, like, so for 24 hours, just try to be as mindful as you can about what your thought process is. So I made this commitment to do that. And that next morning I wake up, you know, to get ready for work. And by the time I get out of the shower, I'm in full-blown anxiety. And I start to realize that I'm in full-blown anxiety because of the thoughts that are going on in my mind. I'm like worrying about, at this point in time, I was still going through this like horrible, contentious divorce. And I'm thinking about having to go in, you know, before the judge. And I'm thinking all these thoughts that are creating my anxiety, and nothing has changed. Nothing has happened. I've gotten out of bed to get ready for work, and nothing is going on except what's going on in my head. And so I created these mantras that once I realized I was going into this negative mindset, it was like, oh, insert tape, you know, and I would just start repeating these mantras in my head over and over again until my mind shifted out of this negative, you know, I was going down the negative path again. No, let's turn and go this way. And I, you know, share with people that it's not an easy thing to do, because people will say, oh, no, I can't do, I wish I could do that. I just can't control my thinking. And it's like, no, you can't. Like, if you've never done it before, it's like sitting down to play the piano when you've never practiced.
Exactly.
You're not going to be able to play, right? You can't play. You need to practice over and over and over again, so that what happens is then ultimately you'll sit down at the piano and you'll be able to play without the music effortlessly. It'll become a part of who you are. And that's what mindset training is all about. It's all about practicing, shifting the thoughts until it becomes a natural part of who you are. And the negative thinking becomes so uncomfortable that you're like, ooh, you know, you're aware of it right away. But it takes a lot of practice and commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And I didn't want to stop anything of what you just shared, because you were just so in the flow of doing that. And I created a bunch of videos about, you know, how the mind and how your thoughts, you know, basically shape your reality and, you know, everything around in your life, because that's literally how you create your reality, by what you think all the time and how it makes you feel, right? So I love the fact that you shared that, because I believe that for a lot of people that's might be living right now, and as you said, most of the people are living on autopilot. They're like merely existing throughout their day instead of actually living it, you know, consciously. So I just, you know, love the fact that you shared so much about why it's so important to be aware of your thoughts and direct those thoughts and realize, hey, like, all right, I'm constantly going into the negative side of things. So let me just, you know, pull that back and, you know, move that into the positive ones. And you also shared that you've been using mantras, right? So every single time you were like, all right, there's something negative going on, you reaffirmed yourself with a mantra, a positive affirmation, and, you know, kind of like went into the positive side of things, right?
Right.
Do you mind sharing, you know, one or two mantras that you've been using, which you've been using all the time to sort of get you back onto the right track?
Sure. One of the mantras that I started to use is I am calm and confident, because the anxiety was so great for me. So that I'm calm and confident. I'm calm and confident until, you know, I started getting. And then another one that I use is I attract positive prosperity. I am a magnet for prosperity. I am a magnet for goodness. I am a magnet for love and compassion. I just, that whole, I'm a magnet for, like, insert whatever it is. I'm a magnet for this. Like, I'm attracting this to my life. So those are pretty much, those are the ones that I, you know, I'm a magnet for is one that I use all the time, you know, when I'm finding I'm in a negative place. And then the I'm calm and confident. So those are, you know, those are my main go-tos. I can't think of, because you put me on the spot, so I can't think of like any other ones. One of the things I did want to touch upon, though, which I talk about in my book, is this this concept of power. Okay, because, you know, one of the things that is emphasized in 12-step recovery is this idea of powerlessness, you know, and it's so true. Like, I'm not negating that. I'm not challenging that. I mean, I definitely, when I was in active addiction and, you know, even in early recovery, I was in a place of powerlessness. You know, I was powerless over my addiction. I was powerless over my son. I mean, there are so many things that we're powerless over, right? But we're not powerless over ourselves. Like, we're powerless over, other people. We're powerless over other things. But one of the things that I challenge that's a belief of a lot of people in 12-step recovery is that you're always powerless, like that, and I don't believe that at all. I believe that, the whole mindset, what I refer to as spirituality, the whole mindset is all about going from this place of powerlessness to a place of power, having power, creating strength within yourself, and that there are things that we can do that will deplete us of power, and there are things that we can do that will give us more power, give us more strength. And especially when it comes to addiction recovery, it's very essential to be mindful of where you are in terms of that power differential. Are you thinking in ways that are depleting your power? Are you doing things that are depleting your power? And what are the areas in your life where you can, do things, think things that are going to give you more and more power? Because as long as you have the proper power differential, then you're not really at risk for picking up a drink or a drug. Because if you're full of, like, if your true self, what I call the true self, what some people refer to as the sober self. But when my true self is really at maximum power in terms of, like, I'm feeding myself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, then I'm not at any risk for wanting to pick up a drink or a drug. But if I start doing things that start to deplete that power, whether that's not attending to what's going on in my mind, engaging in negative emotions, like really allowing those to kind of take over, and then also doing, like, we can do things, what I mean, that take away our power, whether that's, doing something that we know is not right, or hurting somebody, or whatever. Excuse me.
No worries.
So that's that I just wanted to emphasize that I have, like, that's what Dr. Hawkins talks about in Power versus Force.
Fantastic. And what's interesting also to me is because sometimes I believe, as you said, people don't realize that they have an addiction because they perhaps do a certain thing, they have a bad habit, but they wouldn't classify that as an addiction. And I would love to ask, like, next to, substances as alcohol and drugs, what are some of the, a lot of common other addictions that people have? Perhaps like television, smartphones, video games, and all of that.
Yeah, that's the process addictions are a big one now. There's also, there's so many. There's gambling, there's sex, there's porn, there's food. Food is a big one. And that, a lot of these other addictions too can co-occur with substance abuse. So, when of course I talk about substance abuse, I'm talking about like alcohol and or drugs, but food can often be very tied in to people's other substance abuse. So for example, if there's often the case where, females will be using certain substances and they'll stay thin. And then when they start to get sober, they'll then eat. And so they use that as a way to, as a way to stay thin. So because they have this issue with their body image and their appearance, it can then tie into the drinking and or drugging. And then there's also, there's a close link between a lot of sex addictions as well and substances. So there's you can become addicted to just about anything. You can become addicted to work in an unhealthy way, where you become physically unhealthy, where you are sacrificing your relationships in your life, are not healthy because of your addiction to work. I think that you can become addicted to just about anything, and that the key the key when it comes to something being classified as an addiction is that it is something that is creating problems in your life, yet you continue. So for example, my son, one of my sons is an animator. So he's in school right now in his last year of college for animation. And so that creates him being on the computer, like, you know, a lot, because everything that he does is creating on the computer.
Yes.
And he plays games on the computer with his friends, and like Dungeons and Dragons and all sorts of different things. And so, you know, he loves that. If he were doing it to the extent that he was then sacrificing friendships, or he was so obsessed with it that he wasn't taking care of himself physically, or you know what I mean? So you can have something that you're passionate about and that you love and that you do all the time, and it be totally healthy. But when you start, you know, sacrificing relationships in your life or personal hygiene or things like that, then you're starting to get crossover more into it being an addiction. That makes sense?
Absolutely. And that's kind of like the next question that I would have is, how do you identify, you know, what is an addiction and what is not? Because, you know, but you basically just answered that by realizing, all right, you know, I'm slacking off at a few other important factors in my life because I do this thing all the time. And it's so important to me that perhaps that is then an addiction. Because I believe that a lot of people never know that they have an addiction. And probably all of us have a few addictions that we are not really aware of, that it actually is sort of an addiction. So that would be, you know, interesting to find out, like, what are some steps you can take to identify what is an addiction actually. And also then, and the next step is how to, you know, for the people, you know, that are watching this or, you know, are listening to this, what would be some steps for them to sort of, one, find out what they might be addicted to, and two, without perhaps, like, some things aren't as devastating as alcohol and substance abuse, I believe, right? But still, how can they take steps in order to recover from that addiction at home without going to, like, the AA or, you know, other clubs, sort of, you know, like that, if that makes sense? Like, what steps can they take to recover at home from their addictions?
Well, first of all, they need to have a willingness, you know, they have to have a willingness to address it. And so that's what makes addiction so tricky, you know, because like I mentioned earlier, it's one of the only mental illnesses aside from Alzheimer's where people that have it will deny that they have it. So, you know, like that, I used to work with Alzheimer's patients, and quite often, not all the time, but quite often, if you were to try and have a discussion with an Alzheimer's patient about them having Alzheimer's, they will deny that they have it, you know? So it's the same for addiction, and which is why, you know, interventionists are so popular, because it often takes the family getting together and having this intervention with their loved one for them to, like, snap out of the denial that occurs as a result of addiction. So it's more often than not that something needs to happen to snap that person out of the denial that happens. But let's say somebody has the willingness, they realize that, you know, they have an addiction. I mean, I will plug my online program, because I have an online program. It's called the Resilient Warrior Masterclass. And so it is an online program and a community that's for people who are seeking to overcome substance abuse, any kind of addiction, and or codependency issues. So it teaches the things that I've been talking about, and it teaches, like, healthy communication, and it teaches about addiction and what addiction is and what it's not, and myths about addiction, and family recovery, and healthy communication, and spirituality, and shame, and meditation, and, relapse prevention, and it's a whole bunch of modules that people can do from the privacy of their own home on their own. So it's also self-paced. There's not like you have to do, certain, it's meant to be a 12-week program. So it's meant to be about 3 months long, just to give people kind of an idea of how long it should take them to go through the information. But other than that, the mindset practice that really is going to help somebody to be able to break that addiction and to be able to, move forward and grow into their best true self, because the addiction is really taking away from your life, from your ability to fully experience life.
And previously off the call, you said that a lot of the addictions obviously give you a dopamine boost. They make you feel good, right? And I've been watching a series lately, from a YouTuber who was talking about the root of unproductivity, and where he basically said that a lot of the things that we do give us a lot of dopamine, but they just give us a short boost of dopamine. So for example, if you take a substance, you have a very big high boost of dopamine, but then it slacks off immensely, and then you are just out of your energy basically, and you don't have a will to do anything else. So do you mind sharing a little bit more about this topic? Because I believe that for a lot of people watching this, sort of understanding the root cause of unproductivity when it comes to dopamine levels and substance abuse, but also addictions in itself, will be very interesting.
Well, I'm not sure that I can really speak to that topic, very well. I mean, I'll try my best in terms of because really my knowledge is really more so just geared to like substance abuse and addiction and how it affects. What is important to understand when it comes to addiction is that, there are a lot of these businesses out there now that promote like harm reduction and, you being able to, just moderate your drinking or drugging and, go from this place of addiction to just being, able to have a few and you'll be okay. Just learning, you just need to learn how to moderate. And that is when you've crossed over what I call crossed over into addiction, there's really never any going back to moderating. And that's because of the dopamine load. And that's because your brain has been bombarded with such a level of dopamine that I'm not a neuro scientist or anything like that, but my basic understanding of the dopamine impact and the reward system is that once you go through that process of your brain reaching that level, then once you pick up a drink or a drug, it's automatically going to go back to that level again. Like it's going to hit that point, which creates then the craving. So, and I'm probably not explaining this like as well as
That's
I
fine.
should, but it's this basic understanding of once your brain hits that certain level of the dopamine impact, then going back and thinking that you can just have like, one drink or one hit or whatever the substance is and be okay, is false. And so some people say, well, I've been able to moderate, I was, abusing. And so what I say to that is, well, then your brain, the dopamine load didn't cross over into addiction. So maybe you were abusing substances, you were having a hard time and you went through this period of abstinence and recovery and now you're able to moderate. Well, then you didn't cross over into addiction. And so your brain didn't get to this point. But when it comes to like what you're asking about in terms of the productivity, all I can say about that is that you definitely go through this period of post-acute withdrawals for people who experience substance abuse and addiction,
Mm-hmm.
where you're so this is where you get worse before you get better, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
you go from bombarding your brain with the dopamine, and then what happens is that your brain, needs a lot of time to heal. So, so how can I put this succinctly? So a lot of people think, I'll go to treatment for 28 days, I'll go to detox, I'll be fine, and jump right back into life. And so what they don't realize is, because you don't see it, it's in our brain, right? We're not walking around with a brain scan that shows like how our brain is functioning. And so in treatment, I use the example of, if you got hit by a car and you went to the hospital, the hospital is going to release you as soon as they possibly can.
Yep.
And when they release you, you're probably going to either be in a wheelchair, or you'll have a cast, or you'll be on crutches. There'll be something that people can see that you're injured, right? With addiction, you can't see it, right? So it's in the brain. And what people don't realize is that the brain is healing, and there is this, rehabilitation that needs to happen for months. Post-acute withdrawals happen for up to 2 years. And what happens with post-acute withdrawals is, as the brain is healing, it will manifest in symptoms such as insomnia, irritability, low stress tolerance, cognitive issues where you can't remember things, you can't remember what you read, you can't remember people's names. So these things will come up. They usually only last for a couple of days at a time. They're very intermittent, but they'll be happening for a period of 2 years. And that's where thinking that you're going to go to treatment and then go back to work and be at 100%, or go back to taking care of the kids and be at 100% is false. It's a productivity issue, right? You're not going to be able to be as productive as you were, prior to you becoming addicted. And so some people have this false belief that they can just go back to work, they can just go back to, family life, and they'll be able to function as they had in the past. So, I don't know if
that makes sense.
That
definitely makes sense. And you've also talked about cravings a few times, right? And how do you deal with cravings when you are, in the process of recovery? And obviously you will be having cravings all the time. You will be, seeing people drink, and you might be thinking, all right, maybe I can get a drink as well. But how can people, in the process of recovery, deal with those cravings? Like, how can they cope with that?
Okay, so, the first thing I want to explain is that a big part of relapse prevention, you mentioned like seeing people drink, being around people who drink. Relapse prevention is, I equate it to like a minefield. So, when you're in recovery and you're going out into the world as this new sober person, right? It's like you're going out into this minefield, and there are mines all over the place. And if you don't know where the mines are, then the likelihood that you're going to step on a mine and it's going to blow up your recovery is going to be pretty great. And so the relapse prevention is about identifying where all the mines are, like certain places, people, situations that you want to be careful of, because they could trigger you. They could create a craving. And what a lot of people don't realize when it comes to cravings is that something that happens with the neuroconnections, the neurotransmitters, is that when you spend time with people and you, let's just use drinking, but it could be drugs or anything, and it's more powerful when the more powerful the drug, the neuroconnection, is that if I've spent a lot of time drinking with someone, right? And this happened to me over and over again with the man that I used to date when I first came into recovery, is he drank. And so I would say to myself, we're going to go out to dinner. I'm not going to drink. I'm committed to my recovery. And I meant it wholeheartedly. Like, I don't want to drink. I'm committed to my recovery. But what would happen, because I spent so much time drinking with him, is that these neuroconnections were formed in my brain with him and the drink. And it didn't take a long period of time of him drinking in front of me for a chemical release to happen in my brain that
Yeah.
was so powerful, created such a strong craving that I was like, order me one of those. And he'd be like, I thought you weren't supposed to be drinking. And I'd be like, no, I'm okay. That's fine. I'll take one.
Yeah.
Because of the intense craving that happens. And so people do not give that enough validity and credit, like that this is real and that's what happens. So identifying, those areas is really critical, and not putting yourself in that situation. But let's say you are having a craving. There's a lot of different things that you can do to help you move through that craving. One of those, of course, is picking up the phone and calling somebody and helping them to talk you through the craving. Another one can be the mindfulness. If you've been practicing mindfulness, if you've been practicing mindfulness, is like the most, it just is the most undervalued and underutilized tool in all of recovery. Because if through the practice of mindfulness, becoming that third party observer of self, you're able to then be able to slow down the automatic pilot response. You're able to slow it down to such a degree that you can observe what's happening in your body. And so to be able to just sit there and ride it out, and just observe, as that third party observer of what's going on in your body, will help you in and of itself to move through. And also understanding that when you have a craving, cravings usually don't last longer than 15 to 20 minutes. So just knowing that, like knowing, okay, I've got this craving, I just need to ride it out for like 15, 20 minutes. You can also do things like, take a hot shower, take a bath. Aromatherapy is good for cravings. So there's all sorts of different things that you can do for it. But I would suggest practicing mindfulness is a huge, will be a huge benefit to being able to ride through those cravings.
Fantastic. Yeah. And thank you for sharing, because I didn't know that cravings only last for like 15 to 20 minutes. Because if you know this fact, as you said, if you know that, then all right, I just got to stick it through for 15, 20 minutes and it will get easier, once the time has passed, basically. Right.
Right. And also that's where mindset can come in to help you as well, because you're going to be able to ride through that craving much better coming from a standpoint of leaning into it than being like, start to get like anxious and panicky about it. And because being aware again of what's going on in your mind, you can attach to that craving and feed it in ways that will make it worse for yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, KJ, we're getting close to the end of the interview here, and I absolutely loved everything that you shared with me here, and everything with the audience as well. And there's always one thing that I love to ask at the end of the interview, where I believe that the answers are always very, very great in all in all sorts of forms. And I almost know what you're going to be answering, but I'm very excited for that. So, if you were to be able to teach the entire world one concept, one mindset, or one thought pattern that they would understand in order to have a positive impact on the whole world, what would it be?
It would be mindfulness.
Yes,
absolutely.
I knew it.
It would be mindfulness. Mindfulness changed my life. I mean, it absolutely changed my life, because with mindfulness, you go from this place of being this passive participant in life, right? Where I just allowed things to happen. I just was this receiver of, everything that was going on in my life, even my thoughts. I mean, my thoughts were bullying my body, and I was allowing it to happen. I just was this passive participant in it. And mindfulness taught me how to become this active, this active participant in observing what was going on in my mind and starting to direct it towards these areas that were going to actually give me more strength and more power. So I think that mindfulness should be taught from like kindergarten, like the sooner you can start teaching mindfulness, the better. So that's definitely my number one.
I totally agree with you. And that's what I thought you will be answering, because I would totally agree that mindfulness and realizing that you create your own reality, and the thoughts that you have all the day is what is, basically creating the life that you are living from the day-to-day basis. So thank you again for sharing that. Is there anything else you would love to share before we end up this interview here?
Well, the only other thing, which I've already said, is just to get out there that, you know, people can not only recover from their experience with addiction, but they absolutely can, you know, become better than they ever were before and completely begin to thrive in their life.
Fantastic. I love that. So if people want to know more about what you do or reach out to you or, you know, find more help in your courses, how can they find you?
So there are a couple of different ways. I mean, I'm pretty much under Dr. KJ Foster, Dr. KJ Foster, on all the different social media platforms. I have a website, drkjfoster.org. I also have a website for all of my fostering resilience programs, which are the different online programs and resources that are available. And those can be found at FR program. So for fostering resilience, frprogram.com.
Okay, fantastic. All right. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you did, let me know in the comments down below, and also make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you get notified whenever I upload a new video and come up with a new Your Best Self podcast. So KJ, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and sharing your amazing story and everything that you shared with us today. I really enjoyed it, and I bet you have helped a lot of people today.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate you having me.
Have a fantastic
day. Have a great
day.
day.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.